We hear the word strategy tossed around all the time in everyday business language, don't we? You've probably heard phrases like growth strategy, hiring strategy, or the classic 5-year strategic plan. Now, in most of those cases, what people actually mean is something closer to a plan, an intention, or just a really important decision. And while those uses aren't exactly wrong, they are imprecise. And that imprecision actually has a cost. It makes it incredibly difficult to tell the difference between a company that has a genuine strategy and a company that just has a wish list of intentions. There are 4 really common but imprecise ways we tend to define strategy. First, treating it as a goal, which describes a destination but doesn't give you a route. Second, treating it as an identity, which describes the reputation you want rather than how you're going to earn it. Third, treating it as a list of activities, which just gives you a to-do list, not a cohesive logic. And finally, treating it as a plan. This is the most common interpretation, but it confuses a sequence of actions a company can control with a strategy, which is actually a bet on the behavior of people the company does not control, customers who can always just say no. So today we're going to move systematically from theoretical definitions all the way to macro and micro applications. Here's our agenda. We'll start by defining strategy, then introduce the strategic choice cascade. Next, we'll dive into some corporate case studies, walk through a worked strategy example, look at some small business applications, and then wrap it all up with a quick summary. Let's jump right into the definition. Section 1. Defining strategy. What exactly is strategy? Well, to establish a really solid foundation, we're going to look at a highly useful and precise definition from Roger Martin, the former dean of the Rotman School of Management, and A.G. Lafley, the former CEO of Procter & Gamble. Their rigorous definition states that strategy is an integrated set of choices that positions an organization to win, and every single word in that sentence carries serious weight. First up, choices. A choice absolutely implies rejection. If you didn't reject anything, you didn't make a choice. You just described what your company was already doing. Next, integrate it. The choices you make have to reinforce one another. 5 smart decisions that don't connect? That's not a strategy. That's just 5 smart decisions. And finally, to win. The goal here isn't merely to participate, to just survive, or even to be a general leader in the space. It is to win. Now, you might be wondering, how do you know if you've actually made a real choice? Roger Martin has a brilliant specific test for distinguishing a genuine strategic choice from something that just sounds like one. You have to ask yourself, is the opposite of this choice stupid on its face? If the opposite is obviously absurd, then your original statement is not a strategic choice. For example, let's say a company proudly states its strategy is to be customer-centric. Well, the opposite would be to ignore customers entirely, which is completely absurd. Martin calls this an operating imperative. Look, treating your customers well is absolutely necessary, but it's not a strategy, because every single competent competitor out there is going to do it too. Doing an operating imperative doesn't give you an edge. We really have to understand the distinction between things a company must do and things a company must decide. Let's look at how this plays out by comparing 2 incredibly capable organizations in the exact same industry, Vanguard and Fidelity. Vanguard was built on the core conviction that picking individual stocks just doesn't reliably serve investors and eats up their money in fees, so they chose to sell index funds. Fidelity, on the other hand, was built on the exact opposite conviction, placing expert human judgment and portfolio managers right at the center of everything they do. These are complete opposite positions, but notice, neither choice is stupid on its face, and the proof is that both firms became enormously successful by holding on to them. That is exactly what a strategic choice looks like. 2 capable organizations choosing completely opposite paths, which distinguishes them entirely. Section 2, the strategic choice cascade. Martin organizes all of this into a specific framework made up of 5 interconnected questions. Let's take a look. This choice cascade consists of 5 sequential steps. Question 1 asks for your winning aspiration, essentially defining what winning actually looks like and who you're winning for. The big test here is whether failure is actually possible. Question 2 asks where to play, deciding on your specific customers, geographies, and channels. The test here is whether your organization can explicitly state who it will not serve. Question 3 asks how to win on that chosen playing field, which usually comes down to cost leadership or differentiation. The test for this one is whether the opposite of your chosen method is stupid on its face. Question 4 examines what capabilities you need to have in place. The test is whether that capability would be equally valuable to a competitor pursuing the exact opposite strategy. And finally, question 5 asks what management systems are required to make sure this strategy actually happens in the real world. The crucial test here is whether your compensation plan rewards the strategy or accidentally works against it. Keep in mind, this cascade is a looping process. Questions 2 and 3 are really the heart of it, and they have to be answered together. Okay, Section 3, Corporate Case Studies. Moving away from the pure theory for a moment, it's super instructive to see how some well-known historical companies answered these 5 questions and integrated their choices.
If we map Southwest Airlines across this cascade, we see some incredibly deep integration. Their aspiration was to democratize air travel, literally competing against the automobile. Where they chose to play was short-haul, point-to-point routes between secondary airports, deliberately excluding big hubs, international routes, and first class. How did they win? By having the absolute lowest cost structure in the industry, combined with high flight frequency. Their capabilities included using only a single type of aircraft, open seating, and no meal service, which allowed them to turn a gate around in under 30 minutes. And their management systems featured profit sharing and metrics completely built around that turnaround time. The integration here compounds beautifully. Every single refusal, no meals, no assigned seats, exists for a reason. It shortens turnarounds, which lowers costs, which increases demand. If they added just one element like first class, it would slow down boarding, lengthen turnarounds, raise unit costs, and ultimately force them to raise fares, destroying the entire system.
Next up, let's look at Procter & Gamble's strategy for Olay back in the mid-1990s. The brand was in decline, so the team completely shifted their cascade. Their new aspiration was to win in the most valuable segment of skincare, going head-to-head against prestige houses. Where to play shifted to women aged 35 to 50 who were addressing the very first signs of aging, and they would sell through the mass channel. Their how to win was creating a brand new category they called Prestige, which meant prestige-grade formulations offered at a perceived bargain price. Crucially, their capability of having genuine high-level research supported a very deliberate management choice. They priced the product at $18.99. That specific price was out of reach for existing mass-market shoppers, but it signaled a massive bargain to those newly targeted prestige shoppers. This decision only works as an entire system. If you change the target customer, the price, or the research capability, the whole strategy just collapses. IKEA is another amazing example, and their strategy is actually most legible when you look at what the company refuses to do. Their aspiration was to offer well-designed furnishings at prices so low that almost anyone could afford them. Where they play is strictly focused on budget-conscious customers furnishing a first home, using massive stores on cheap land, and they completely exclude high-end, custom, or expensive city center locations. They win through cost leadership that almost looks like differentiation, and they achieve it by literally transferring the labor to the customer. Their capabilities include designing everything to a strict price target first, flat pack engineering, and that famous fixed path showroom. Their management systems are set up to ensure designers always work against that locked-in price. Every single refusal, no delivery, no assembly, no salespeople hovering around, makes that low price credible. The customer's own labor is the exact mechanism that makes IKEA's entire strategy possible. Now, in stark contrast, let's look at the structural failure of Sears to see what happens when you completely ignore this framework. When we examine Sears against our 5 questions, their answers failed at literally every level. Their aspiration had no scoreboard. They used vague financial language, which meant there was no real condition under which they would admit they had lost. They excluded nothing. They pursued mall stores, discount stores, appliances, insurance, real estate. They just refused to exit or commit to any one thing. They had no how to win, because they weren't the low-cost option, and they certainly didn't offer a superior experience. And even though they had some world-class capabilities, like the Craftsman brand and a massive national catalog, those assets didn't serve any coherent strategy. Finally, their management systems actually substituted for strategy. They reorganized into 30 competing business units, and each one just optimized its own income statement. But here's the thing, you can't build a strategy from units that are only optimizing locally. Conceding certain fields is the actual substance of strategy, and no single unit has the authority to make those concessions. Section 4, a worked strategy example. Now, all those previous examples involved massive corporations, but this cascade applies at any scale. We're going to shift into a micro-application workshop to really demonstrate the nuts and bolts of how this works. For this section, we're going to analyze Ridgeline Animal Hospital. Please note, this is a fictional teaching example, but it's built from very real industry conditions strictly for academic illustration. So, Ridgeline is a highly pressured veterinary clinic. They're getting squeezed by an aggressive corporate consolidator from above, low-cost vaccination clinics from below, and online pharmacies that are extracting all the margins from the sides. Watching the practice move through the cascade reveals a lot of common pitfalls. In phase 1, their very first aspiration was to provide compassionate, high-quality care. But remember our test? That fails, because the opposite is callous care. That's just an operating imperative. In phase 2, they tried to build a strategy based on what they were already good at, deciding they were the relationship practice. But again, that just described their current operations, not a future choice. Finally, in phase 3, they had a breakthrough. They found a structural opening. One of their veterinarians actually had a behavioral residency. Now, behavioral medicine is tough. It requires 90-minute appointments, seeing the same vet every single time, and a very low stimulation environment. Here's the key. Their consolidator competitor was using a model of 15-minute appointments and high-throughput dashboards, which physically prohibited them from offering behavioral medicine. Every tightly integrated competitor has a set of moves that their own integration stops them from making. So, Ridgeline's final cascade required some intense focus. Their new aspiration was to be the statewide referral practice for behavioral cases, where to play focused exclusively on aggression and fear-based handling failures, while explicitly refusing to take on routine care for new clients. They would win on differentiation pricing for delivering outcomes you literally couldn't get anywhere else. The capabilities they needed included board certification, specialized staff training, and a $140,000 facility redesign. But crucially, their management systems had to change. Under the old system, the vets were paid on a production formula that rewarded fast, routine appointments. The compensation plan was literally paying them to undermine the new strategy. So, scheduling defaults and front desk metrics had to shift away from appointment volume and focus on referral case resolution instead. Making this a genuine strategic choice required the very real pain of turning away routine clients. And that proves a core point. A true strategy requires sacrifice.
Section 5. Small Business Examples. Just to further reinforce the mechanics of how strategy either compounds or fails, we're going to look at 3 more localized scenarios.
Once again, Marisol's Notary, Tran Brothers Auto Glass, and Cedar & Company Bookkeeping are fictional models. We constructed these purely for educational purposes so we can see how the cascade operates at the micro-business level. First up is Marisol's Notary. Her aspiration is to be the absolute first contact for title companies late on a Friday afternoon. She only plays in real estate loan signings, and only during evenings and weekends, explicitly excluding daytime business hours. She wins on absolute reliability, which allows her to command premium pricing. The vital management system she uses is a 45-minute buffer between appointments that she never, ever sells. Now, that might look like waste, but it's actually the central mechanism of her business. It absorbs bad traffic or clients running late, guaranteeing she never misses a time window. That absolute reliability causes title companies to default to her for their highest stakes closings. That default status supports her premium price, and that premium price funds the buffer. The choices compound perfectly. Our second fictional model is Tran Brothers Auto Glass. Their aspiration is to be the default vendor for insurance adjusters. They play exclusively in insurance-paid mobile replacements, intentionally restricting themselves to just the 6 most common vehicle platforms. And they completely decline physical shop work or cash-paying customers. They win on cycle time, giving same-day service, and this aligns perfectly with the insurance adjuster's #1 metric, days to close. Because they keep a narrow inventory, the correct glass is always on the van. That eliminates return trips, which produces same-day closure, which leads to adjusters defaulting to them even more, which totally justifies keeping the narrow inventory. Any work outside those 6 variants, they deliberately hand it over to competitors to protect their integrated system. Finally, let's look at Cedar & Company Bookkeeping to see a cascade that just doesn't cohere. Their goal is to be a trusted partner for small businesses, but they don't exclude anything. They serve restaurants, contractors, retail, nonprofits, you name it. This creates a massive structural cost because it requires them to master multiple distinct software environments and totally different regulatory rules. And because nothing is excluded, their expertise doesn't transfer from one client to the next. Their how to win is simply personalized service, which, as we know, is just an operating imperative. On top of that, their management system of hourly billing financially punishes their claimed differentiator of deep expertise, because the more expert you are, the faster you work. A strategy that excludes nothing doesn't build a compounding advantage. It just accumulates a bunch of unrelated obligations. Section 6. Summary of Strategy. To wrap up this explainer, we really need to cement these core tests of the strategic choice cascade.
Strategy is an integrated set of choices that positions an organization to win. Let's do a strict recap of the rigorous tests for these 5 questions because this is the core of everything. For your winning aspiration, the test is whether failure is actually possible. For where to play, the test is what you have explicitly excluded. For how to win, the test is whether the opposite is stupid on its face. For capabilities, the test is whether they would be equally valuable to a competitor pursuing the opposite strategy. And for management systems, the test is whether your compensation actually rewards your strategy or opposes it. Remember, questions 2 and 3 are the absolute heart of this and have to be answered together. Ultimately, integration isn't the goal itself. Integration is just the natural result that emerges when you make genuine, restrictive choices. So the defining question for any organization isn't whether you have a plan. The real question is, do you have the institutional courage to make the agonizing choices required to actually win?